Hi everyone, I'm going to talk about a few of the books that I have read recently. Now, a few of these books are on the Women's Prize long list, and I do really poorly with TBRs that are like forced on me. I can't even create a TBR for myself because I rebel against myself and I just get kind of angry that I am forced to read like specific books. So I have been breaking up my Women's Prize reading with these other books. And so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to talk about all of them that I have read recently because otherwise I don't know when I'm going to talk about these other books. And now that I'm talking about it, I realize that there's only actually one of the 4 books that I'm going to talk about right now is not on the Women's Prize long list, but that's fine. It's sneaking in here for whatever reason. So the first book I want to talk about is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, and I ended up DNFing this book, and let me explain why. So this book is based, you probably all know, this book is based on David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. I have not read it. I have, since my last video, watched an adaptation of David Copperfield. Watched the adaptation around like 200 pages into this book, and I had been reading these 200 pages. I think it probably took me close to a week to get that far into a book, which is really, really slow for me. And I think it's partly just I wasn't super interested in what was happening in this book, but it was also partly just that's my mood lately. I think I'm like very hot and cold with books right now, and this one honestly left me a bit cold. So the way that Barbara Kingsolver adapted this story to our modern times is she focused on a boy who is living in Appalachia and living under pretty extreme poverty. His mother has a lot of addiction problems. That's how the story sort of kicks off. He has, you know, a stepfather who ends up being really horrible to him. He ends up getting separated from his family. But I feel like this is one where maybe under different circumstances, I could see myself really enjoying this. Every now and then there's just books where you read it and you think, you know, this is really well done, but it's just not for me. Or maybe it's just not for me right now. I can't decide which of those it is because I do think that it was well written, and I think that the voice was really strong in this. I had a very clear sense of what Barbara Kingsolver, like this voice in her head almost, I can imagine as she was writing it, it really came across the page very clearly. So I do think that, like, technically, objectively speaking, it was well written. That's why I don't know if it's like it's not you, it's me thing, or maybe it's not you, it's just me right now. However, I will say that once I watched an adaptation and got a sense of where this story would likely go, my interest in it was already pretty low, and finishing the book was already pretty low. And after I watched the adaptation, I felt like I was good. I'm good. Like, I have an idea of what's happening here and I don't need to finish it, which is not great. I just didn't really have any interest in how the other plot, like complications and relationships and such, would be translated into this setting, meaning this is not for me. The next book on the long list that I read was Children of Paradise by Camilla Gradova, and this was a very strange, interesting book. I actually read this in one day, I believe. It's fairly short, but it's also a really quick read. I think though that if you read it really, really fast, you might miss out on a lot of the nuance. I do have sort of torn feelings about this because there was a lot of interesting things going on, but I also felt like I couldn't connect with the characters that much. So let me give you just a brief synopsis. So we have our main character Holly, and she gets a job at a cinema, and it's the only comparison I can make is it reminds me of like an indie cinema. So not like one of those big multiplexes with, you know, like the 3D glasses and, you know, the craft beer and all that. It's not like that. It's more of a small independent artsy, like things are kind of run down and frankly pretty gross at times. And there's only one screen and they just sort of decide what to play. It seems like on a whim, out of some sort of like pretentious whim that the employees have. And so this is the cinema that Holly starts to work in. I saw this book shelved on Goodreads, I want to say, as horror, and I just don't really agree with that. There was definitely some gross stuff that happened in here. There was some unsettling moments. Not horror though, and I love horror. I feel like I am qualified enough to say that I do not understand why people call this horror. There is this cast of characters here that Holly works with, and she tries to connect with them, but they seem like this very insular, sort of cliquey group of people, so it takes her a while to warm up to them and vice versa. There isn't a plot to speak of. I suppose there is like a minor conflict that sort of puts all of their jobs in jeopardy. Really, I think the main thing that you would get out of this book is the characters' relationships with each other, trying to sort of figure out who they are outside of the context of the theater, because it did feel like a lot of their identities were wrapped up in the tropes or the stereotypes that they were playing into, like with the types of movies that they preferred or their sort of prejudices about other people and based on what movies they enjoyed. I did find it like interesting in a somewhat intellectual sense, but I didn't feel connected to the characters themselves that much. And so ultimately, like, this was a pretty quick, easy read, and I feel like if I were more invested in it, then I could spend more time like digging into the meat of this book and maybe finding other things that it was trying to say, but I didn't feel connected enough to the characters to really want to do that. So the third book, I just freaked myself out because I felt a tab, but the third book from the long list that I read was The Dog of the North by Elizabeth Mackenzie, and I mentioned in a previous video that I read The Portable Veblen when it was longlisted, shortlisted, whatever it was, several years ago, and I really enjoyed that book. The thing is, I remember really, really loving that book, but I don't remember anything about the book itself. So take that for, you know, what you will. This book is following our main character, Penny, and she's sort of at a crossroads in her life. She is in the process of getting a divorce, and she quits her job that she really has no connection to, really doesn't care about. And she has a lot of family members in her life who rely on her. And they're mostly older family members, so like grandparents, aunts. She doesn't really have any connections or many connections to anybody her own age, really. But we watch Penny as she's trying to sort of renegotiate her life, where she has, you know, broken off this previous relationship, quit her job, but she still has a lot of ties to the people around her in her family. So she has a grandmother who I believe she was a surgeon, and she's just a force of nature, and honestly she annoyed me so much at points, but she was also a really good character. She had a very strong personality, as they say, and so Penny is constantly caught trying to negotiate between all of these different people in her life that she's related to. Whitaker, what are you doing? So she's caught between all of these different people in her life. You know, she's like the peacekeeper and like the problem solver, even though in her own personal life things are kind of falling apart. There were several times in this book where I was laughing out loud. I don't think I could get 10 pages in this book without laughing out loud at something. I even like tabbed a couple of things. There is a point where this van she's driving around in, this van, it doesn't belong to her, it belongs to another character, and she's just kind of Whitaker, my cat's running around. She's just driving this van around while he's indisposed. There's a point where somebody graffitis the side of the van, and it's hilarious. Makes the funniest observations about things going on around her, and they tend to be a bit self-deprecating, but in a really funny and like kind way, like a kind way to other people or other things. So one of the things that I marked was, she says, "I remembered the thud I'd heard on the roof during the night and despaired. A rabbit who was the star of his own narrative had been torn limb from limb while I'd been focusing on the theme of the bird." So she has this way of sort of contextualizing the things that happen to her in a way that puts other people at the center. Even in this case, like that rabbit, she puts this rabbit at the center of its own narrative. So I really enjoyed this. I will say I gave it 4 out of 5 stars because there was just at the end a lack of cohesion to me in the story. I was 100% engaged, really entertained, really liking this. The characters felt fully fleshed out. I would say if you like Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, which was I know that was a pretty big book a few years ago. It was also on the Women's Prize list, but if you like that book, this book reminded me of Eleanor Oliphant, not in terms of plot necessarily, but just in the characters and their relationship with other people. And I guess this almost denial of like personal struggle because you're so busy thinking about other things and other people. So if you like Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine. I think that you would like this book as well. Okay, the last book that I have read recently, this is not on the women's prize list, but I'm throwing it in here because I can, is Walk the Vanished Earth by Erin Swan. Now this book was very unexpected. I just randomly picked this book up off of my shelf. It is a speculative fiction book that begins in the 1800s, just a quick little vignette there, and then travels back and forth in time until we my cat. The narrative travels back and forth in time until we finally get resolution and understand how these different time periods are connected to each other. So it's speculative fiction. It's that climate change speculative fiction that has, you know, become popular in recent years. In the current, or I guess in the time period that we would be familiar with, the planet has just gone to hell and water levels have risen quite a lot. There's been a lot of like earthquakes and floods, and so a lot of coastal cities have become uninhabitable. But then we're also switching back and forth with a timeline in the future with a young girl who's about 13, 14, and her name is Moon, and she lives on Mars with two people she calls Uncle 1 and Uncle 2. Uncle 1 and Uncle 2 do not seem to be human, and we're sort of left wondering if Moon is even completely human. We're not really sure because she has no context for the life that she's living, like how she got there, who the uncles are, like anything. We don't either. And the story just gradually unfolds to help us understand the connection between the events that climate change has wrought on Earth and how Moon got to Mars living with these two uncles and what it is that they're hoping to accomplish. So this was a really strange book. I love this type of speculative fiction where it doesn't make things easy necessarily. You really have to work and be invested in order to follow this through to its conclusion, but I really like that kind of story. I thought all of the characters were really interesting, and I really wanted to know like what their outcome would be, like how they were connected to each other. And so I would definitely recommend this book if you are somebody who likes any of those things. So climate change related speculative fiction, science fiction, a narrative that slowly unspools until you can understand how everything is connected. Let me know what you guys thought of those books. If you've read any of them. I have not really heard much about Walk the Vanished Earth since it has come out, so I would definitely recommend that for those of you who have not heard of it. I know this video is delayed and I don't know when the next one's going to come because I have a crap ton of grading coming my way in the next couple of days, and it's going to take me weeks to get through end of the semester. That's just how it goes. I will do the best I can. I think I still have how many? 9 books. I own 8. Yeah, I think there's one more book that's coming out later this month, and I own 9 more that are on the women's prize list. So I am making my way through them. I'm currently reading Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee, and I'm planning on finishing that book today. Currently screaming also, just gotta say. But then I will get back to the women's prize list, and I will see you in the next video. Bye. This is just out of my control.